Before the controversy, before the headlines, before the FBI got involved, Bubba Wallace was already racing under pressure few could fully understand. Born in Alabama and raised in North Carolina, Bubba wasn't just fast. He was historic. The first full-time black driver in NASCAR's top series since Wendell Scott in the 1970s. He broke through a sport known more for its southern roots and conservative fan base than for diversity. But Bubba didn't arrive quietly. He brought with him not just talent, but conviction. By 2020, his name was already well known on the track. He had driven for Richard Petty Motorsports and held his own against the best in the sport. But that year, something changed. Outside the raceway, America was on fire, grappling with the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and a global protest movement. Inside NASCAR, Bubba Wallace made a bold move. He called for the banning of the Confederate flag from all tracks and events. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a challenge to NASCAR's deeply rooted past. And the sport responded. NASCAR, long criticized for clinging to outdated imagery and exclusionary culture, banned the flag on June 10, 2020. It was a historic moment. For some fans, it was long overdue. For others, it was heresy. Bubba became a symbol, a flashpoint. Suddenly, he wasn't just a driver. He was the face of change in a sport that hadn't always welcomed it. Interviews poured in. Camera crews followed him. Social media exploded with both admiration and hatred. And behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. He wasn't just racing laps anymore. He was racing against expectations, against prejudice, against the weight of being the only one. He had no room for mistakes, no margin for error. Every word, every race, every headline became political. And that pressure was about to boil over at a racetrack in Alabama, the very state where both NASCAR and Bubba's journey began. Because Talladega was waiting. And what happened there would ignite a firestorm unlike anything NASCAR or Bubba had ever seen. It was June 21st, 2020, Talladega Superspeedway, Alabama. NASCAR's largest oval, a place filled with history, horsepower, and high-stakes racing. For Bubba Wallace, the weekend was already tense. He had just been part of one of the biggest cultural shifts in NASCAR history, the Confederate flag ban. The decision rippled through the fan base, igniting both praise and fury. Many had shown up at Talladega that weekend defiant, waving banned flags from trucks outside the gates, staging unofficial protests, flying Confederate banners from planes overhead. Inside the track, Wallace's team prepared his car as they always did. But then, something unexpected. A crew member assigned to Bubba's garage area discovered a rope hanging from the garage door. But not just any rope. It was fashioned into a loop, tied in a way that resembled a noose. The crew member froze. Everyone knew what that symbol meant, especially in the context of the racial tensions swirling around Bubba and the sport at that moment. The discovery was reported immediately. NASCAR officials didn't hesitate. They secured the area, they launched an internal review, and most importantly, they contacted federal authorities. The FBI was called in that evening. NASCAR President Steve Phelps gathered teams, expressing both outrage and resolve. The message was clear: NASCAR would not tolerate hate on its watch. Word leaked quickly. Journalists picked up the story. Social media ignited. What began as a quiet, internal report had become a national headline within hours. For Bubba, who hadn't even seen the rope at this point, it was the start of a nightmare that would unfold in public, far beyond his control. The next day at Talladega dawned with heavy skies, figuratively and literally. NASCAR teams awoke to the weight of what had happened. Whatever differences existed between drivers off the track, In that moment, they were united. No one wanted the sport to be defined by hate. No one wanted Bubba Wallace to stand alone. As the cars lined up on pit road, something remarkable happened. Drivers and crew members from every team gathered behind Bubba's number, 43 car. Together, they pushed it down pit lane to the front of the grid. Bubba walked beside them, tears welling in his eyes, humbled by the solidarity. In that moment, cameras captured an image that traveled around the world, a symbolic rejection of racism, and an affirmation that Bubba belonged. From the stands, fans cheered. Social media flooded with supportive messages. Hashtags like #IStandWithBubba trending across platforms. Major media outlets called it a turning point. Sponsors and celebrities chimed in, praising NASCAR's show of unity. The moment was raw, emotional, and powerful. Even those who didn't follow NASCAR were moved by what they saw. Bubba later said, "That was probably the most powerful moment of my career." It wasn't about speed or trophies. It was about something bigger. Human decency, shared humanity, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the sport was ready to change. But as with many powerful moments, the backlash would soon follow. What was meant as unity became, for some, fuel for doubt and division. The story was far from over. As the dust settled from the emotional show of support, the investigation kicked into high gear. The FBI dispatched agents to Talladega immediately. They interviewed team members. They reviewed video footage from the garage area. They examined the rope itself. Within 48 hours, they released their findings. The noose-shaped rope wasn't placed in the garage that weekend. It had been there since at least October 2019, when another team had occupied the stall. It was, in fact, a garage door pull rope. One fashioned into a loop, yes, but not freshly tied, not targeted at Bubba Wallace. The FBI concluded no federal hate crime had been committed. The garage had been assigned to Bubba randomly. There was no plot, no malicious intent. For NASCAR and Wallace, the news was both relief and frustration. Relief that Bubba hadn't been targeted with hate, but frustration at how quickly the narrative had spiraled. The initial report was made in good faith. The reaction, swift and sincere. But in the lightning speed world of media and social platforms, facts rarely catch up to first impressions. And those first impressions had already spread like wildfire. By the time the FBI report hit the airwaves, millions had already formed their opinions. Many saw the unity at Talladega as justified, a stand against the possibility of hate. Others were quick to label the entire episode as an overreaction, or worse, a hoax. For Bubba Wallace, the most difficult chapter of the story was only beginning. No sooner had the FBI concluded its investigation than the online backlash exploded. For many, the garage rope incident had been proof NASCAR was evolving, showing a rare moment of solidarity. But to others, especially those already critical of Bubba Wallace's stance on racial issues, it was ammunition. Despite the fact that Bubba never found the rope, never made the report, and had no role in initiating the investigation, hashtags like #fake noose and #Bubba Smollett began trending across social media. Influencers, commentators, and political voices weaponized the story to claim that Bubba had staged a hate crime, a claim with no factual basis. He was called everything from an opportunist to a fraud. Memes flooded Twitter. Talk radio dissected his motives. Some accused him of orchestrating the incident for attention, ignoring the fact that the FBI and NASCAR had already confirmed he had nothing to do with the discovery or the initial reaction. Even major news outlets contributed to the confusion. Headlines blurred timelines. Sound bites took over context. Suddenly, it wasn't about a misinterpreted rope. It was about Bubba Wallace and whether he could be trusted. Sponsors who had previously praised Bubba's advocacy now faced backlash themselves. Behind closed doors, some reportedly considered pulling their support. NASCAR fans were split, some doubling down in support of Bubba, others publicly denouncing him. And all of it, every insult, every lie, every manipulated headline, was being aimed at a driver who had simply shown up to race, only to find himself at the center of a cultural firestorm he didn't start. The backlash was no longer about a rope. It was about identity, power, and who gets to speak in a sport long dominated by silence. As the backlash intensified, Bubba Wallace did something many didn't expect. He stayed calm. In a series of interviews across major networks, he didn't lash out. He didn't accuse. He didn't retreat. Instead, he stuck to the facts. He told Don Lemon on CNN, "It was a noose. Whether it was meant for me or not, it was a noose." He reiterated that he never saw it firsthand. He only responded after NASCAR and the FBI confirmed what the crew had found. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't embellish. He didn't try to turn it into something bigger. But even his calm, factual tone was used against him. Critics twisted his words. They accused him of doubling down, when in truth, he was simply telling the truth. And behind the scenes, the toll was starting to show. Friends said Bubba stopped sleeping. Sponsors pressured his PR team. Every appearance was now a landmine. And every mistake, even one misspoken word, could cost him everything. He later admitted, "It was one of the lowest points of my life. Because I didn't do anything wrong, but suddenly, I was the villain." But even in that darkness, Bubba refused to back down. Not for attention, not for ego, but because he knew what that rope symbolized, regardless of intent, it had an impact. And for Bubba, this wasn't just about NASCAR anymore. It was about standing up, even when standing up meant standing alone. As the days passed, the story mutated. Media outlets, desperate for ratings, clicks, and commentary, dug their claws into the Talladega incident. And with each new headline, the truth became harder to find. Some ran with no hate crime as proof that Bubba had lied, completely ignoring the fact that Bubba never claimed it was. Others used the story to stoke political fires, dragging the sport and the driver into America's broader culture wars. Cable news turned it into a circus. Social media turned it into a meme. And through it all, the timeline got distorted. People forgot that the garage was locked, that Bubba was assigned the stall randomly, that NASCAR made the call, that the FBI was the one who classified the rope's form as a noose. Instead, it became a symbol, not of unity, but of controversy. The media spiral didn't just hurt Bubba's image, it put NASCAR itself under scrutiny. For a league trying to rebrand, the incident was a PR disaster. Inside the garage, tension grew. Some drivers allegedly told reporters they felt duped. Others stood by Bubba, but worried about the fallout. Bubba went from hero to headline in a matter of hours, and every time the story was repeated, it got a little less accurate and a lot more dangerous. What started as a good-faith response to a misunderstood situation had turned into a nationwide referendum on who gets believed and who gets blamed. From the start, NASCAR took the situation seriously. After the garage rope was found, they acted fast, locking down the area, alerting the FBI, and briefing every team and driver. NASCAR President Steve Phelps made an emotional public statement, declaring, "We will not tolerate racism." In that moment, it seemed like a new era was beginning. And for a while, it worked. NASCAR earned praise for standing with Bubba Wallace, showing the world that a historically conservative sport could evolve. But after the FBI's conclusion, that wave of support started to falter, outside and inside the garage. Some fans accused NASCAR of jumping to conclusions. Others within the sport quietly questioned whether the league had been too quick to declare the rope a hate symbol before having all the facts. The very decisiveness that initially looked bold now appeared to some as reckless. Internally, the incident caused real tension. While the public saw unity on pit road, some team owners and longtime insiders were frustrated that NASCAR had staked its reputation on a misunderstanding. One executive was quoted anonymously saying, "We reacted with our heart, but it cost us politically." Still, the league refused to walk back its support for Bubba. They clarified the timeline. They emphasized that the rope was indeed tied like a noose, regardless of its age or intent. And they reminded the public that Bubba Wallace had not reported it himself. But by then, many weren't listening. NASCAR had taken a moral stand and paid for it in fan backlash, political outrage, and online vitriol. Yet in private, sources say leadership had no regrets. Because in their eyes, it wasn't just about one rope. It was about showing drivers like Bubba that they weren't racing alone. While the FBI's findings ended the investigation, the fallout for Bubba Wallace was far from over. In the weeks and months that followed, his career teetered on the edge. Sponsors who had publicly backed him were suddenly quiet. Some considered pulling out entirely, afraid of being dragged into controversy. Behind the scenes, Bubba's PR team worked overtime to manage the media storm. But the damage was done. His name, once associated with progress, had become, in some circles, synonymous with controversy. Bubba admitted later that he struggled emotionally. The backlash took a toll not just on his reputation, but on his mental health. "I was waking up angry. I was waking up exhausted. It felt like I was fighting something every single day," he said in an interview. Even inside the garage, the atmosphere shifted. Some drivers reportedly avoided speaking about the incident altogether. Others offered quiet support, but warned Bubba to lay low and stay out of the headlines. It was a silent message. Survive this, or it might be the end of the road. At one point, it seemed like Bubba might walk away from the sport altogether. Rumors swirled about early retirement. Team executives weren't sure if he'd land another top ride. The weight of being NASCAR's only black driver, thrust into the center of a national controversy, was crushing. And then, everything changed. Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin announced they were launching a new team, 23XI Racing. Their first driver? Bubba Wallace. The move was a lifeline, not just for Bubba's career, but for his spirit. It was validation, and a signal to everyone who doubted him, he wasn't going anywhere. Looking back now, the Talladega garage rope incident is about far more than a misunderstood object. It's about how stories spiral, how narratives harden, and how public perception can outpace reality. Bubba Wallace didn't fabricate anything. He didn't seek attention. He didn't file a report or make accusations. He simply showed up to race, only to find himself at the center of a storm he never asked for. And in the chaos that followed, the truth was buried under headlines, hashtags, and hate. But in surviving it, Bubba Wallace became something more than just a driver. He became a case study in how society reacts to race, to truth, to discomfort. He became a reminder that even in 2020, a rope in a garage could still split a country in half. And for NASCAR, the incident was a reckoning. The sport had to decide who it wanted to be and who it was willing to stand beside. By backing Bubba, it made enemies, but it also made history. Today, Bubba continues to race. He's won at Talladega, stood on the podium, and proven that he belongs, not just because of what he represents, but because of how he drives. But the memory of that day lingers, not as a scandal, but as a moment that revealed the cracks in America's mirror. And perhaps most haunting of all is this: Bubba never got to choose the story, but he survived it. Not everyone would have.